Hello and welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast, the space where ideas turn into actions and dreams become reality. I'm your host, Beenish Mirza, and in each episode I will sit down with some really wonderful, incredible women who've taken a spark of inspiration and transformed into something so meaningful. These are real stories of purpose, passion, and perseverance. So wherever you're listening from, settle in and get ready to be inspired. What does it really take to create classrooms where every child feels they belong? And how can parents and educators work together to make inclusion more than just a buzzword? In this week's episode, I'm so excited that I finally get to sit down with Zahara Chowdhury, the founder of Schools Should Be and the author of her groundbreaking book on inclusion in education. It's called Creating Belonging in the Classroom. Zahara shares her journey, the powerful stories that inspired her work, and the key shifts schools need to make if they want to embrace true belonging. If you're a parent raising children from an ethnic or Muslim background, we explore how you can advocate for your child in the classroom that doesn't always reflect their identity. If you're an educator, Zahara reveals practical steps to move beyond their language and build classrooms that genuinely value diversity and belonging. And if you're simply passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, you'll walk away with ideas that reach far beyond the classroom into the way we lead, parent, and build communities. This isn't just a conversation about education, it's about reshaping society through belonging, one child or one classroom at a time. I can't wait for you to have a listen. Enjoy. So Zahara, welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast. Before we dive into your book and the work you do, I'd love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about you. So do you mind just sharing your journey, what drew you into the world of education and particularly into diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging?
Yes, hi, thank you so much for having me. So my background is in education, straight, very sort of boring story, I guess, straight out of university. I did my degree in literature and then I did the PGC and just became an English secondary and school teacher. And that was well over 10, nearly 15 years ago now, which is quite scary thinking about that. And so I started out in secondary education in the UK, teaching English, and then sort of worked my way up the ladder in secondary education. So was head of English, then associate senior leader. And that's going back around 7 or 8 years now. So back in 2017 was when I was still working full time in schools. But around the same time, education teaching is very stressful, and well-being wasn't really a thing in schools then. Like, it was a sort of nice to have. So schools, obviously we're talking pre-COVID, were very, very much about you'd have that presenteeism culture, you'd still be marking every evening, and it just didn't sit right with me. So I did a lot whilst working as head of English to reduce things like marking, create more balance for my staff, and then also leading on well-being across the school. And it led me into training as a personal trainer, because I really enjoyed fitness as a way of de-stressing, finding that balance. And I realized it brought a lot of staff and students together. So I started doing personal training, fitness classes, mindfulness, more into nutrition. And it really interestingly, organically led into me leaving teaching as my full-time role, but working, going into kind of corporate companies, schools, colleges to deliver well-being workshops or training and development, which was super fun. And at the same time, I was doing things like PR writing, ghost writing, because of my background in English. And then COVID hit, and I had my children around that same time. And we then saw what happened to George Floyd, his tragic murder in the States. And because my degree in literature, going back all that time, focused on multiculturalism, anti-racism, it really sort of sparked something in me to, because it kind of took me, it was like a bit of a trigger, like it took me back all those years. And I realized, I was like, there's so much wrong within education, there's so much that still needs doing in terms of creating equity and inclusion within the classroom. And it reminded me of loads of conversations I would have with my students about everything and anything but what we learn within the curriculum. So we would always have conversations around politics, race, society, fitness, finance. And it was my students who would still keep in touch and want to follow my journey in self-employment. That they were like, Miss, you should really start podcasting and blogging. And I didn't have a clue what any of that was around that time. But I was like, okay. And it was actually my students who taught me how to podcast, how to blog. As well as like other colleagues within the field. And that sort of has just sort of organically led to me then leading EDI in school. So I had a few head teachers who saw the work that I was doing, and they asked if I would lead equality and diversity at their school. So I sort of went from teaching and learning into more whole school belonging, whole school inclusion, and developing their EDI policies and strategies. And that's my background, really. That sort of is quite an eclectic mix of things, from standard teaching, personal training and well-being, to then leading EDI.
Yeah, I love that. It's so fascinating because actually all of them link into each other in a different way and they're all overlapping.
Yeah.
You spoke about all that mindset well-being shift through nutrition, through the well-being sessions, through the various tools you were using as well. What were some of the, I guess, the key findings or issues you were noticing, particularly when you said actually there's still a lot that needs to be done in the schools in this space? What was it that you were finding were some of the common themes, maybe through your students or just through the work you were doing?
So I think one of the most common themes was behavior management. So I like to me, behavior management should center relationships with students. But it wasn't really something I would ever, especially when I was just teaching, like in the classroom and learning myself, like being a early teacher. It wasn't something I would talk about so openly with my colleagues, but in my own classroom, it was all about relationships. So like secretly, I wouldn't necessarily enforce the wider school. I probably shouldn't say this on podcast, but I wouldn't necessarily enforce like detentions or the sanctions that my school might have in place. And that was purely because it didn't sit right with me. And it's a bit like parenting. Like I couldn't naturally do what they wanted me to do because in my head I was like, a detention or shouting at them for, I don't know, not having the right water bottle on their desk isn't, in my head, it just wasn't a priority. Like I was like, I just can't understand why I'm trying to manage and work with these students through these behavior management strategies. And also, I realized and learned that they were very exclusionary. So, if you've got students who are marginalized, or and that could be marginalized for many reasons, whether it be their own special educational needs or individual needs, race, religion, even things like socioeconomic background, home life. So much of that comes into the classroom, particularly in a subject like mine, where I would see my students 4 to 5 times a week. And you're teaching them in their most formative years. So instead, I started just using conversation, and it sounds probably a bit too simple, but like just talking to them about what works for them, what works for me, approaching it from like a, what I would say, compassion. We're both here for the right reasons, and we need to get along. So what can we do to mitigate the issues that we might be facing? And also what I realized is that because students are so conditioned to a sanction driven world in education, like everything's about punishment, or a lot is about punishment, a lot is about them standing in line like mini robots, really, they were always looking for a reason to not like me or not like their teachers, right? Because no student, no child wants to be in that. No adult wants to be working somewhere where they can't just relax and be themselves. And what I realized was by focusing on their relationship, our relationship, and therefore their sense of belonging in my classroom, and we actually managed to overcome any kind of behavior issues. Like, they did do their homework. And it was things like, if they hadn't done their homework on a Thursday night, why am I going to give them a detention when I'm not planning on marking it Thursday night? Like, if I'm not going to mark it until the following Monday, I'd be like, it's fine, just bring it in on Monday. Like, and it was like a bit of a light bulb. They were like, oh, okay, that this is and I was like, yeah, it's fine. Like, and I think that's quite sadly, it was definitely very uncommon. It probably still is uncommon, purely because teachers are very stressed, working in highly challenging schools in many cases, and they're trying to do the right thing by their workplaces. So I think the key theme for me was behavior management and relationships, which sort of has led to the work that I do now.
I love that so much, because actually when you linked it to parenting, as you were speaking, I could really hear some of the power in actually just empowering those children or those students to have that adult to adult conversation. Yeah, actually it's building that sense of trust, that psychological safety,
Yes.
that openness within those relationships. So thank you for sharing some of those examples. Straight away as a parent, I feel there's so much I could take away from what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's even things like curriculum in schools that would be the second theme. Sorry, I should have said this, but
Yeah, I know that's
curriculum being English was my subject, and English is one of the, like, I'd say, the most dominant subjects in most secondary schools across the world, really. Literature it's still a very dominant subject in the UK. It's what I led. So as head of English in particular, you're leading such a vital part of the curriculum, and one which is effectively pivotal in student development and student qualifications and their success. Like, English and maths are like the go-to, aren't they? What I also realized, and this is what sort of led to me blogging, is students would always say, why are we doing Shakespeare? Shakespeare's not relevant. That same sort of, like, kind of conversation that every student every year is like, why are we doing this man who hasn't lived for hundreds of years and we're still studying his plays? And as an English teacher, I'd be like, no, there's so much. And there is, I stand by this, there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of value in learning from Shakespeare. There is. But that's a very sort of, particularly for me, teaching in classrooms which were over 60 to 70% global majority or ethnic minority, I was like, what? I'm enforcing this one figure on them who absolutely is valid and has written some amazing texts and literature, but there are millions of other authors, of other people, are in and around the world, people that I don't even know, I've not even read, who can teach them so much more and so much other stuff, basically. And I was like, there I am as a teacher, a bit of a fraud in my curriculum, trying to enforce Shakespeare, Chaucer, certain, like, UK-based poetry, sometimes a bit of American literature. Like, it was all very, it's very Western. So it really then made me think, how can even myself as a, South Asian, British Pakistani woman, I don't relate. Like, that's not my cultural capital, and I don't know what my cultural capital is. And now I'm trying to, like, mold these students into cultural capital that isn't even, not that it's not theirs, but they have so much more to them. So then my work in terms of EDI is and was very much around working with teachers on, okay, let's enrich your curriculums now. Like, what else can you teach? And that is so challenging, just given the nature of the school curriculum. So that's still a huge body of work that so many EDI specialists and teachers are doing now.
Yeah. And when you speak about it, it just makes so much sense, isn't it? As an adult, is there certain texts that we'd prefer to read once we get a choice, to pick a book? Or
Yeah.
I have this when I go to the library with my children, and I try and encourage them to pick whatever calls out to them. If it's an easy book, challenging book, does it really matter? And actually, it makes so much sense because for students, it's sort of you're setting them up for failure anyway, because everyone questions a little bit of, like you said, why am I doing Shakespeare? But then there's also this layer of, I don't see myself at all in any of the texts I'm reading. So is there a double layer of potential disadvantage there?
Yes, exactly. And it's so much of it is so problematic. And then it's almost like you can't question it being problematic because and I know we just talked about Shakespeare here, because he's such a revered figure. If I was to pick up on the levels of misogyny in his text, the levels of racism in his plays, certain political problem, so there are things around socioeconomic status in his texts, abuse, all it's there. Don't get me wrong, his plays are amazing as a piece of art. But if you can't then pick up on the fact that, okay, we're all here talking about, like it's probably similar in the international community, but in the UK, figures like Andrew Tate have sort of dominated education headlines as of recent. But then Romeo and Juliet opens with misogyny, full-blown misogyny. Romeo blames Juliet for his shortcomings. And I'm like, well, there's a clear correlation here. But now we're like, no, Shakespeare must be revered, but we all must hate Andrew Tate. So I just find, as a teacher, if you pose those problems to students, they really sort of are like, oh my God, like they really sit up and think, because you're making two very different pieces of two different contexts so relevant. So that's yeah, if that makes sense.
I love that. I just find that so interesting to hear that, because actually it is all those hidden messaging that, students are exposed to, but are maybe unaware of in the moment. Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for that background about you, and it's so exciting to hear, what led you into the field that you're doing. So, firstly, congratulations on your book.
Oh, thank you.
It's creating belonging in the classrooms, correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
And so, tell us, could you tell me what the book's about? What led you to write this? I know you've given us a bit of background, but what is it that you're hoping, if someone picked up your book today, what's one or two of the key messages or feelings you'd like them to walk away with? And who is this book for?
So the book is very much inspired by my students in that I've been teaching for over a decade, and pretty much every conversation I've ever had with them, and it is for teachers. So the book is very much aimed at educators, teachers. Whether that be you are an early careers teacher or a head teacher, there is a chapter in the book for anybody who is working within education, particularly secondary education, because my background is secondary education. So the book, I've aimed it, and I've tried to be very transparent about that, to say that it's very much for the secondary school teacher or the secondary school educator. And it's effectively, how do you create a sense of belonging for every student in the classroom? And so the way it came about was when I started leading equality and diversity in the classroom, I realized just how many students don't feel like they belong. And that word belonging is something I unpack throughout the book, because it means so many different things to different people. It's its own body of academic work, especially within the fields of like psychology, sociology. Like, what is it that it means to belong? Do we all belong? Can we all belong? Is it a consistent Is it just a feeling? Is it something that's tangible? Is it something that you grow into? And the book is very much aimed at supporting teachers to help create those classrooms, create those schools where every student, whether they are marginalized, whether they are a minority or not, belong in their classrooms. How can we ensure that difference and diversity in our classroom settings, in our school corridors, in the playground, in different subject areas? How do we ensure that every student feels that they should be there, that they should be in school and in that classroom. And that kind of should be is inspired by my blog, School Should Be, because school should be a place for every student. Like, it, to me, I've always seen school as a second home, and for certain people it's their first home, particularly if they're not coming from very healthy or safe home lives. We know that there are so many students that school is their safe haven. It's what protects them. And that, to me, as a teacher, and I'm sure that speaks to so many teachers, is what sort of drives you to make sure that school is safe for young people, because we know that they, especially now, um, the challenges that young people face in the world, in society, at home, the cost of living crisis, all sorts of things have an impact. So the book is very much, it's a kind of, it is about creating that sense of belonging, supporting teachers on how to do that within their classrooms, how to do that within different subject areas, and then also how to do that for different groups of students, whether they be minoritized or otherwise.
Yeah. I really couldn't agree more when you said, what is belonging? What do we mean by that? And really unpicking that word. Um, it's my favorite part of DEIB as well, really. Yeah, there's so much to talk about when it comes to belonging. And, it sounds so interesting to hear what the space that you speak about, in particularly in secondary school and the students of that particular age. So what does true, I guess, belonging, inclusion in a classroom mean to you? And, what sort of messaging is your book giving to the teachers, educators, or anybody interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
Oh, that's a really good question. Like, kind of put me on the spot now. Like, it's so what, but I would say there's no one sentence answer to that. And for me, it's very much about students feeling confident and able to have conversations with you. So some people say, what I found really interesting, particularly when I was doing the research around belonging and for the book, and especially when I was speaking to different teachers and different students, sometimes they understood belonging to be that no matter who they are, that they can absolutely say and do whatever they want to do within the classroom. Or it was like, well, no matter who you are, of course you belong in the classroom, because everybody has to go to school. So because everybody has to go to school, schools are for everyone. But my understanding of belonging, or my sort of definition of it, is that when a student feels confident and able to express themselves, to ask questions, to be curious, and then also they feel safe enough to challenge you, and safe enough to be vulnerable as well, and be naive, like safe enough to be naive, safe enough to be ignorant in your classrooms. That, to me, is belonging, because a student, all of us, even adults, we don't know everything. Teachers are absolutely respected and revered figures, but teachers themselves will say, we don't know, like, everything about anything. Like, there were times where I was only one chapter ahead in terms of the text I was teaching, because I haven't read every book in within the world of literature. But what I was able to do was be confident with my students to share that, and there might be some teachers who are like that. You can absolutely not share that. In fact, I've worked with head teachers who are like, you can never tell a student that you're only one chapter ahead. But I would always be like, but why? Because the more they know about me feeling that way, being vulnerable, sharing my sort of sharing that, they will know, okay, Miss trusts me, I trust her. So it's like a reciprocal, belonging is also a reciprocal relationship in terms of that sense of confidence, disclosure. I also think belonging is fun. So I think if a student can have fun in your classroom, if they can come in and laugh. Not obviously, like, it's not stand-up comedy, although sometimes it can be. I don't think I've ever laughed as much as I have in my classroom anywhere else. Like, students crack you up. Like, teenagers, from my experience, are extremely funny, and they're hilarious. I find teenagers so funny. I also find them really interesting characters in terms of we're in such a privileged position of caring for them and teaching them and molding them, their values, all of that is shaped in their formative years. So it's such a huge opportunity if we want to create and build global citizens. So to me, belonging is fun. It's there, it's something where a student can relax in your classroom as well. And then also there's that element where belonging is compassion. And so if you've got, and that I think is very important for minoritized students in particular. So if you are teaching a classroom where you have a very small group of students who are Black or Asian or Hispanic, or you're teaching a very small group of students who are dyslexic, who are who may have ADHD, who may be autistic, they will, and some people do argue against it, hopefully very few, but those students will feel more vulnerable. They are in a more vulnerable position in your classroom, particularly because mainstream education isn't tailored towards individual needs. It's not tailored towards marginalized. It's for that neuronormative mind, in a way. That's what mainstream education is built for. So as a teacher and as a school, as a group, as a team, effectively, because you're a team in a classroom, you've got to then ensure that every student is respected and there is compassion. And that's compassion for the so the book is case study based as well. So there are case studies in that book of certain situations. So for example, very recently, what lots of teachers have been talking to me about is Israel-Palestine and the impact that is having in the classroom. And I've had students talk to me about that too. Andrew Tate, so again, misogyny, the kind of the conversation around toxic masculinity or masculinity in general. How is it that teachers can navigate that space, particularly with social media? And there are teachers who don't have a clue who Andrew Tate is, who have no idea about the history of Palestine. They don't know anything. And that can be quite, to some teachers, they're like, how can you not know? But then the book is compassionate in that we don't all know. We don't all have the same lived experience. So it provides templates, wording, really, semantics for teachers in particular on how to handle those conversations. So if a student does shout out "Free Palestine" in your classroom, what do you do? If a student puts their hand up and says, "I love Andrew Tate," or "I hate Andrew Tate," or "You're mansplaining," or "That's anti-Semitic," how do you deal with that in the classroom? So yeah, that's what the book is aiming to do.
And there's some, important, tough conversations that I guess educators, teachers have to really navigate.
Yeah.
And I know we've spoken about it briefly before, but a lot of the themes seem very common, that even adults face in the workplace, in the working group environment, in their own spaces. And, so much of what you described about what belonging means in the classroom or creating that belonging feels like such a combination of the environment, the relationships, to foster that confidence, that transparency between the relationship. And it sounds very underpinned with the tools that you're trying to support, is underpinned with that coming back to that genuine care and sincerity of teaching from a teacher.
Yeah.
And really just having that emotional awareness as to how to navigate what they're seeing or what they're not seeing.
Yeah.
And I love hearing all the language around that, because actually it's very much, from a coaching perspective, particularly with the ICF, that's very much, the traits and skills they want to foster in everybody, in every leader, not just people who are trained, qualified coaches. So I guess, a question I had was for teachers in particular, given the environment, the climate they're having to work in globally, but particularly in the UK, they've lost that sense of passion or that genuine desire to care for their classroom, to care. How does your book really give them that motivation to remind themselves that they play such a big part in schooling, in the education system, within society, to help create and foster those leaders, those people of the society and future, work we're going to be in.
So the book very much champions teachers from the get-go. Like, I make it very clear that from my own experience, and it is quite anecdotal in that it was my teachers that changed my life and were like the people who molded me, made me feel safe in the classroom. So it very much starts with placing the teacher at the center of compassion. Like, a teacher is such an important figure in society, in a child's life, even in a parent's life, right? Like, because I've when I've been teaching, I've had parents come to me and ask me for my advice, like parenting advice, and this was before I was a parent. And I remember thinking to myself, I have no clue how to be a parent. Like, I'm not a parent. But what I've realized since becoming a parent is that there is no manual. There's no preparation for parenthood. Whereas when you're a teacher, there's loads of prep, there's loads of support, there's loads of training and development. And also, you're so experienced. Like, day to day, if I was teaching 5 periods, I'd be teaching 150 students a day. And they'd be from all different age ranges, all different backgrounds. So a teacher, in the book, I very much center the importance of a teacher. And equally, the book it takes a very compassionate approach to DEIB, because I think we're now, like you said, teaching's become a very public profession. So of course it's a public, in the UK anyway, for the most part, it's a government-led public sector job, right? Like, schools are funded, a lot of students, majority of students attend state schools. However, things like social media, things like email communications, things like the media have made teaching a very, very, like, there's always a mirror being held up to teachers, or to teachers. I wouldn't even say there's a mirror, it's just a mirror. It's almost like it's a window. People are always peering in to what a teacher is doing. There's always judgment. And I really try my best to acknowledge that in the book, because it's not fair and it's not right. No other profession, apart from, I'd say, perhaps medics, like the medical profession, no other apart from those kinds of professions, face such public scrutiny and such judgment. Which is really hard, really, really hard when things are taken out of context. And what that has done is it's like you said, it's put a lot of teachers off. Like, it's sort of made teachers think that the job is no longer about teaching. It's now just about people pleasing. It's now just about behavior management. It's now just about getting through the term. It's now just about exams, or it's not even about teaching for the richness of academia type thing. So what I try to do in the book is give through a compassionate lens, give teachers their confidence back as well. So you might not know anything about race, religion, disabilities, socioeconomic status, etc., etc. But that's okay, because there is language in the book that can help you learn. Like, the book takes the approach of, none of us have the answer, and actually, this isn't about cancel culture or call out culture. This is about supporting one another to be able to teach future generations. And then equally, there's also a dedicated chapter in the book on leadership. So in my role, I worked a lot with head teachers. So very much like you were saying, and it kind of translates into your work with regards to coaching. And my work now is very much with those leadership teams and working on their strategies. And ultimately, I always challenge head teachers and leaders to say, it's very easy to say you want to create a culture of belonging in your schools, but how do you model that? How do you tangibly, belonging can be such a bit of a woolly word. Like, how is that tangibly communicated and visible for your staff? Is it visible in your policies, in your benefits packages, in management meetings and conversations? Because if it's not visible teacher to teacher or leader to teacher, then it definitely won't be visible in the classroom. Because if a teacher who's a professional isn't happy in their work, they are not going to feel like they belong at the school, and therefore they won't necessarily feel that um, motivated to create that sense of belonging in their classroom. So the book, I try very hard to take that, and it very much is centered around compassion and teachers not giving themselves so much of a hard time, and to not be scared. Like, DEIB doesn't need to be scary.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful to actually hear that respect back for the teachers, that compassion for the teachers. And particularly when you called out, the bit around, they're not meant to know everything. It's fine for them to know everything. And there is a part in which obviously the leaders you spoke about, that top-down approach for the culture that they're building. But actually, from thinking about it from a parental perspective or community's perspective, how can parents support that support, with the teachers? Particularly, I'm just thinking as a teacher, as a parent myself, what roles, what advice do you have for parents and communities to be able to support that compassion for teachers and to help them understand a bit more around belonging for their particular children, whatever that might be, whether it's through race, whether it's through religion, whether it's through disabilities? How can parents support those conversations versus just jump to the assumption of, bias or racism or ignorance even? What advice would you have for parents and communities?
I would say parents can also approach these conversations with their own children with compassion. So if there are if there are situations happening in school, and a child comes home, and absolutely believe your child, because I think it's really important to believe the child, and that's a huge part of belonging. Believe your child. Believe that if they are feeling vulnerable, if they have felt bullied or something inappropriate has been said. Firstly, believe them, but also ask them to unpack it. And when you absolutely, you're well within your rights to approach a school, and approach them just like you would any other customer service based service, in a way. So you would approach them in line with the school's communication policy. You would approach them professionally, because I think that's one thing that is almost forgotten between parent and teacher, is that it is a professional relationship. Like, teachers, like, you wouldn't necessarily jump across the counter in a supermarket to, question the cashier, for example. You wouldn't, go knocking on the door of your bank manager's house because, you're annoyed that your account is overdrawn. And it's probably a really bad example, but
Yeah.
it's what I'm trying to say is that teachers are professionals. So if you hanging around their classroom to sort of have a go at them or say something like, this happened in the lesson, my son or my daughter came home saying X, Y, and Z, that's not helping anyone. Like, and I appreciate there may be parents listening to this saying, I don't necessarily understand the full story, which I totally appreciate, but equally, that approach isn't helping anyone. Like, that approach isn't a professional relational it doesn't have a professional dynamic. So I would say, pace yourselves, really. Follow the school's communication policies. Approach it with curiosity. So if there is a situation where your child has something untoward has been said, or a teacher has said something, because DEIB, just to sort of caveat this, in schools in particular, DEIB, you usually hear about it if it's negative. Very rarely will you hear about, oh, the school's so inclusive. Like with most businesses, you hear about the negative from a customer service perspective. So when you hear that, of course, like I said, listen to your child, get them to unpack it, but approach it with curiosity. Approach it with saying, and also approach it as factually as you can. So say that your child said X, Y, Z. You would like to know more about this. Is there an appropriate time to meet? When is best to talk about this? Is there a parent-teacher consultation coming up? Of course, if those modes of communication don't exist, then it might be a case of emailing the main school, getting in touch with the head teacher. But I think it's really important for parents to remember that teachers are professionals, and again need that 24 to 48 hour communication window, really, because like I said, if you're teaching a 5 period day and you've taught 150 students and you've got marking to do after that, you've got exam classes, that's whilst your child is every child is important to a teacher, and your child is so important to you, but like a teacher only has a certain amount of time. So you've got to kind of, and they've also got their own lives, they've also got their own families. So it's just about balancing that level of professionalism, I think.
Yeah, and it's such a knock-on effect, isn't it, actually? Because we're talking about belonging without contradicting. It starts on the teacher's well-being. Say, actually, as a parent, as much as you can support that well-being through those conversations, through that feedback, you can still have very difficult conversations. But actually, what I'm hearing is very much the how you have them, in the way it's structured, in the tone, in the timing, uh, having that, remembering that compassion for the teacher.
Yeah, definitely.
It
Yeah, because I think that can make it can be a game changer in terms of belonging, and you feeling that your child is safe. Because ultimately that's what it's about, isn't it? That I'm very aware of that, especially since I've become a parent myself, is that if a parent kicks off, it's not coming from a bad place. They are sincerely worried about their child's well-being and safety. And I think even for a teacher, if there are teachers listening to this, that can be sort of like with belonging and inclusion in schools, I always think you've got to start from some sort of common ground. And the common ground is that the child's well-being and safety is at the core of the problem. So if you center that, then it can make the conversations about belonging and inclusion a lot easier.
Yeah, totally. And, I mean, one of the questions I do want to ask you, particularly for the type of listeners I may have, is, with Islamophobia on the rise globally, what sort of advice or, tools can you provide maybe our parent listeners, particularly maybe from either a Muslim or a South Asian background, to help support their children within the school environment?
So yeah, that's a really good question. And I've written blogs about it. I've written blogs about how to navigate Islamophobia on my website. So parents, they're all free access. There's also uh, Diverse Ed, which is a education consultancy that specializes in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And there are toolkits, so that there are freely available toolkits on belonging, on navigating things like Islamophobia. And then there's also BAME Ed in the UK, so BAME Ed. And they have a whole host of resources for parents as well. So it's almost like, particularly in the UK, if you Google these things, you'll get all of these blogs and resources, which I think can really help parents, because the one thing particularly with Islamophobia being on the rise, and that could almost be a podcast in itself because it's so multifaceted in terms of how it has almost, I would say, sort of like the compound effect of the last few years, and how Islamophobia is now being unpacked and navigated within the education system is huge. It's so big, particularly as there is no definition for it. There's no official definition of Islamophobia nationally. But Islamophobia, I think, for parents in particular, Muslim parents, and I'm a Muslim parent, we feel it and know it and understand it without necessarily needing the semantics to explain it. So I, as a Muslim parent, feel Islamophobia and see the unseen. And when I talk to another Muslim parent, I don't need to use words to explain it. Like, they, on the whole, usually just get it. And that's a real comforting feeling for me as a parent. It's very validating. The reason why it's really important to read up on Islamophobia and to read the blogs and to read I guess the literature around Islamophobia, is because the majority of the teachers who you may be talking to about your child's experiences won't feel it, they won't see it, they won't understand it. So in order to communicate with them, you need that language of Islamophobia, the language to explain what it is, and even the language to challenge it. So say, for example, you are explaining a certain situation, or, you're worried about your child, um, and you don't feel like the school's taking it seriously, because that happens a lot too, and I'm very aware of that. You have to be in a position that you have the literature and the language to challenge that, so that the school do take you seriously, basically. Like, if I'm being completely like candid about it. And also it helps the school. I've always had like if I think of my own children, I don't make it that like it's not many people necessarily know that I'm a teacher, or when I meet, I don't introduce myself in that, or like I don't say I focus on I'm a EDI specialist, or I've written a book on belonging, or I've done this with regards to I've done Islamophobia training. I don't say that, but it's in conversation, or I'll be like, oh, is that what you think? Have you thought of this? And then all of a sudden, even very recently, just thinking of play dates that I've been on, I've had people going, oh gosh, you should come into our school, because that's what I'd really appreciate that help. And that's when I'll say, oh, so I happen to do this, so if you would like some support, I'm more than happy to help you out. And that's what I've realized, that it's very much about having the language, or to navigate something as emotive and as real as Islamophobia, because it's really hard teaching teachers or telling people about something that is felt and that is so embedded in the fabric of our society now, if they don't feel it. It's that privilege, isn't it? If they don't feel it and they don't experience it, then they will need the language to be able to deal with it.
Yeah. And that's so, I think when people listen to that, they'll be able to really resonate with the way you've described it so beautifully, because it is a feeling that you can't describe. And it sounds like by what you're saying is actually, as a parent, what you can do at a minimum is enrich your vocabulary, have the tools available to help the other person listen to you, help the teachers, help the leadership team to really understand the point you're trying to make. And often, maybe the language we use can sound to them and even to us a bit dramatic in what we're trying to get across. Whereas actually you're saying that, some of the tools that you provide, some of the websites you referred to, there are support systems out there that can really help break down the way in which we're trying to get our messaging across.
Yeah, and like if I can give a quick example, like prayer space is something that is a constant bone of contention or conversation for many schools, many parents. And I find it really interesting. I'm like, if you just flip it. So if a student comes home and says, Mum, Dad, I'm not allowed to pray. Like they're saying, I'm not allowed to pray. I can't use that spare classroom. I can't do this. And I'm always like, okay, you can either kick off, which, because it is infuriating, because it's something so simple. As a Muslim, I know how easy and seamlessly prayer is embedded into my day-to-day life. But for a teacher who has or not just a teacher, but somebody working in a school who has absolutely no experience of the religion or prayer, they might not think it's that simple. So the way to flip it is to almost, and it's some people might disagree with it, but the way to flip it is, I think, by offering suggestions and solutions, to say it's like, for example, the like Zohar prayer at lunchtime. Could it be that they can pray in a classroom where there is a teacher present? Could it be that they it will take less than 5 minutes, and there are XYZ locations where they could put down their prayer mat? Absolutely fine for them to put their prayer mat down in the playground, no problem at all. Now, if you then get teachers and you then get school staff saying no, like adamant that this isn't going to happen, then you know that there is a thread of Islamophobia here, because they wouldn't necessarily say that to a student who needs a timeout. If the student's got like a pass that allows them to have a bit of a break, or I know some schools have quite draconian policies, but some schools let students go to the toilet during a lesson. Well, if you're allowing that, why are you not allowing the 2 to 3 minutes it might take to pray? And it's a really interesting, it's a long conversation, or it can become a lengthened conversation, but it's using tangible examples as parents that can really help create that sense of belonging for your child. And also you're teaching your child how to navigate some very tricky territories that we are facing as a community and as a society today.
Yeah, and that's such a great example to help break it down, because you're absolutely right, isn't it? It's modeling the having those difficult conversations versus maybe just ignoring them, brushing them under the carpet, or feeling too afraid.
Yes. Yeah.
The consequences of what may happen or may not happen um, to your child without having those conversations. So thank you so much for breaking that down. And so Zara, like, what is the future for you? What else are you working on? What can we expect from you beyond your book now?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I'm still currently, I'm navigating a 5-month-old and 2 other children, so that's it's all about getting work to fit in around my and family really. But I'm also I'm still blogging, I'm still podcasting, I'm delivering bits of training and development around the book and around diversity, inclusion, and belonging. In the future, I work in higher education as well, so very much looking at inclusion and equity from a HE perspective. So how is it that all three um, sectors, so secondary, primary, and HE, how can they come together? And so that's been like a big piece of work that I've been doing to create that sense of access, particularly for minoritized communities. But yeah, I'm very I'm just at the moment sort of just very much focusing on the book and sharing that and ensuring that it's reaching the right audiences and people like it. And then let's see, I haven't really got anything too much more concrete than that for the future.
No, and I love it. And so your book, so where can people get hold of it in the UK, globally, in the UAE?
Oh, so it's available on Amazon. So Amazon is global. You can order it from Amazon. You can also order it from the Bloomsbury website. It's available as an ebook as well as a hard copy. So it's a paperback book. And yeah, you can there's a discount code as well. So it's if you use on the Bloomsbury website, if you order it using the code belonging25, you get 25% off until the end of November, I think. But I can fact check that for you and let you know. But it's definitely November, until November.
I can't wait. I literally can't wait to get hold of your book and just be right here and fully just scribble all over it and put my thoughts to it. So
Oh, no, I'd love to know what people think. Thank you.
yeah, no, it sounds like there's so much wonderful work, and particularly with the case studies, I think that will really bring it to life. And look, I know you said it's for teachers and educators, but I know there's so many people so passionate about what happens in schools, particularly here in the UAE. And where I'm back, back home where I'm from as well, I know there'll be a number of people interested in it. So yeah, no, thank you so much. And Zara, look, I've loved your work. I've loved following your work that you've done for so many years now, and I wish you all the best with your book. I cannot wait to read it. And thank you so much for just being that voice that so many people need in the education system. So, before
Oh,
we
thank you. That's really kind. Thank you. And thank you. I feel very privileged to be on your podcast. So thank you so much. Like it's been, yeah, I feel very starstruck. So thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sarah. And just before we end then, so if people want to get in touch with you or want to follow your work, what is the best way they can contact you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Zahara Chowdhury on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram at School Should Be. So you can follow my accounts there. And I have my website, schoolshouldbe.com. And you can get in touch there too.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Coaching Chapters podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired and reminded you of what's possible when you follow your own calling, your own passion. If you loved this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. And remember, every big journey starts with a small idea, a small passion, and a small calling for purpose.